Hello, and welcome to The Joy of CX. I'm David Cox, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about the mechanics of how to go about creating functional excellence. What we mean by functional excellence is really focusing on what it takes to understand and get rid of the things that get in the way of the relationship between the customer and the organization. It's absolutely fundamental, and if you don't listen to any other episode, I think this is the one that really captures the essence of where to begin your journey to customer centricity. So the essence of this is really about bringing CX fully into the classic management structure of measure and manage. This is what it's all about, measuring the experience that we deliver to customers and then managing that experience so we're continually improving and continually getting rid of the things that get in the way. So before we get into detail, I think it's probably worth taking a little bit of time just to talk about different types of measures and what are the most appropriate measures to be using to support a customer-centric transformation journey. The classic measure that most organizations gravitate towards, certainly in the early stages, is Net Promoter Score, NPS. And just to remind you of the simple definition of the Net Promoter Score, you ask customers on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely they are to recommend an organization to their friends and family. Those that score 9 and 10 are what are called promoters. They're the customers who love you. Those that score 1 to 6 are what we call detractors, the people that really don't like you. And the 7s and 8s are the passives, the okays. The Net Promoter Score is simply the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors, the proportion of lovers to haters, if you like. Honestly speaking, it's a very good overall measure of the experience of your customers, because it takes into account all aspects of the experience that we've talked about. When you decide whether you're going to recommend a company to your friends, you take everything into account. Sense of value for money, experience of day-to-day interactions, the feeling they transmit. So the NPS score is a very good overall barometer of how your customers feel about you, and therefore how customer-centric you are. The issue with NPS is that whilst it's a great overall score, a bit like taking your temperature, the NPS score tells you whether or not you have a fever, but it doesn't tell you what's wrong. It doesn't tell you anything about what's actually driving your symptoms. So NPS enables you to measure your overall customer experience and even compare it with your competition, but it doesn't enable you to manage it. So we need something underneath or supporting the overall NPS temperature check that helps us to understand what we need to fix in the day-to-day experience. And there are a couple of principles that I want to establish in choosing that measure. The first is laser focus on the negative. What is causing customers to be unhappy across their experiences with you? Forget the positive for a moment. Our job here is to get rid of those things that are getting in the way. All of those things that are irritating our customers. Only once we've done that do we really earn the right to start focusing on building positive experiences. And that takes us to the second principle. We're not measuring for the sake of measuring. We're measuring for the sake of action. It's not about tracking and trends and so on. It's about understanding what we need to fix and fixing it. And finally, and this is absolutely critical, we have to allow the customer to tell us what's important to them, not the other way around. We have to listen to what they're saying, whether we like it or not, whether we believe it or not. So with these three principles in mind, I've developed an approach, a kind of mechanism that I've put in place in many, many different organizations. And it's this mechanism that has really enabled companies to take a major step forward, a major mindset shift in the way that they look at customer experience. I'll confess it's slightly off the beaten track compared with the typical platforms of CSAT metrics, transactional NPSs, customer effort scores, and so on. So let me try and go into and explain this approach that can have such a profound effect in a bit of detail. What is the key essence of this simple framework for measuring and managing CX? First point is, we need to structure the way that we look at our customer experience in terms of the customer journey. I know there's lots and lots of different ways of looking at customer journeys, but the key thing, at the risk of stating the blindingly obvious, is to think about our journey model absolutely from the customer perspective and to keep it very simple. We need to force ourselves to think about what customers are going through, not what the company is doing, what our organizational structure is, what our departments do, and so on. So let's go through an example. I've done quite a lot of work with telecoms companies in the past, and a very simple telecoms journey would be something like this. There's a joining moment which covers all of the consideration, choosing the right plan, signing the contract, all the way through to the early life experience of the customer. Then there's an ongoing use moment, which covers all aspects of the experience of using the service, making calls, accessing social media, etc., etc. Because it's an ongoing moment, it's often one that's overlooked and not tracked as a moment in its own right. But from a customer point of view, it's actually one of the most important moments in determining the overall experience. Moving on from there, we hit the pay moment. This is not just about the bill and the physical execution of the payment. From a customer point of view, it's the moment where you put your hand in your pocket and you give your money to the company. And at that moment, you crystallize all of your feelings about value for money, about being ripped off, about being conned, and so on. Then there's a moment of making a change, changing from one plan to another, upgrading our phone, all these sorts of things. And this is another classic moment that many organizations miss. They lump it together with sales to new customers, because to them it's just a sale process. But from a customer perspective, you have very different expectations. You expect to be treated differently, to be known, to be prioritized, so you need to measure it separately. Then we get to the moment of getting help, where the customer needs some help and support. This is what we traditionally think of as customer service. But we have to think about all the different channels. It's not just about calling the call center. It's getting help from elsewhere, from social media, from advertising, from the app, and so on. And finally, we have the leave moment that covers what happens when the customer expresses an intention to leave, and either we manage to retain them or not, and they go. So that's an example of a very simple 6-step customer journey that we can use to form the basis of how we measure. To measure the quality of the experience of our customers as they go through each of those steps. So we have our customer journey. The next question is, what should we be measuring? And this point's absolutely critical, and is also where I've diverged a little bit compared with other, possibly more complex models out there. For me, the most important thing to know is, for customers that have just experienced the moment, very simply, whether they were happy or not. And specifically, what percentage of them are not happy. Being this binary about the world allows us to hone in on a single KPI for each moment, what percentage of customers who go through a particular moment were not happy with their experience. This gives a metric that's much more tangible, understandable, and sometimes almost visceral. As I said, this is a shift away from some of the classic ways of measuring the day-to-day experience. You know, the typical CSAT metric where you're getting scores of 6.7 out of 10. Everyone looks at it and says, 6.7, that sounds okay-ish. But as soon as you express your measurement in terms of percentage of dissatisfied customers, it starts to become a lot more tangible. Saying that, for example, 40% of your customers are not happy with their experience in a particular moment, that feels a lot more real, a lot more uncomfortable than having a CSAT score of, say, 6.7. I remember I was working with an organization, I won't name them to protect their blushes, but they were going through the motions of doing CSAT surveys on their billing moment, as they called it. They called it billing. And they were getting scores of 5 to 6 out of 10, and were happily tracking the score on a monthly basis. So we took those scores, and just by applying a kind of NPS principle, so those that scored 0 to 6 out of 10 on the CSAT survey, we said were dissatisfied, we were able to show the organisation that, and I kid you not, that over 50% of their customers were dissatisfied with the pay moment every month. So that means that more than half of their customers hated them every month when it came time to put their hands in their pockets. And this was a huge wake-up call for everyone in understanding what was really going on and just how important measuring customer experience actually is. To really come to terms with the fact that half of your customers hate you every month, or as in the case of another telecoms operator I worked with, that more than a third were not happy with the quality of the network they were using every day, is the first and vital step in really facing reality and recognizing the fundamental importance of CX. So the key here is to strip away everything and just focus on the cohort of customers who are not happy, and to understand what proportion they are of the total customers that have gone through that moment, because then you've got something that becomes truly tangible. So once you've understood what's the level of discomfort you're causing to your customers, the next question, and this is absolutely critical, is to understand what it was that made those customers unhappy. And I know that again this is stating the blindingly obvious, but it is a key point. And from experience, there is only one surefire way of getting to what made them unhappy, and that is to ask them directly. Because only by asking customers will you really understand what, from their perspective, made them score you a 1 out of 10 in the first place. I've seen so many organisations that have tried to interpret what customers are saying. They've tried to ask supplementary questions in their CSAT surveys and do complex correlations to try and infer reasons and so on. But the simple solution is to go back to those customers who scored us low, told us they were unhappy, and simply ask them why. We can talk about the mechanics of doing this in a while, but for now, the most important thing to understand is that we're only asking unhappy customers, and we're asking the simple, open question of what made them give us a low score. I've learned over the years that typically there's one or occasionally two top of mind issues that really triggered their unhappiness. And this is what we're trying to get at. What is the thing that really bothered them from their point of view? We're not trying to double guess or interpret. We're just trying to find out what they think we got wrong. Let's go back to our example of the pay moment in our undisclosed telecoms operator to try to bring this to life a bit. The operator had been asking all the typical supplementary questions in their CSAT survey. Was the bill accurate? Was the bill clear? Did it arrive on time? Did your payment go through effectively? Etc., etc. There was an army of people doing extrapolations and interpretations, and further armies working hard to redesign the bill and improve clarity and so on. But the CSAT number never moved. So we started to contact the unhappy customers and ask them why. And a completely different, although probably with hindsight a very obvious, answer came back. They said they were fed up because the bill was always higher than expected. That was what was really annoying them. They'd signed up to, a $50 plan, then every month they got a bill that was $67, $75. It was an unpredictable amount and was always higher than they expected in the first place. And this accounted for more than half of all of the cases of unhappy customers. So it had nothing to do with the bill at all. It was a case of feeling overcharged and, to be honest, conned by the company. So we're focusing on a really, really key objective here, which is to get a clear view of what causes most pain to most customers in a particular moment in the journey so that we can fix it. And the key here is that we're not imposing any kind of prioritization on customers. We're not interpreting their results. We're just getting unfiltered feedback and aggregating it so that it tells us what are the big rocks that are getting in the way. What are the things that customers keep stubbing their toes on month on month? What are the things that they are shouting at us that we need to fix in order for them to start to see us in a positive light? And this is the critical thing here. We're trying to get under the skin of customers. We're trying to get customers to tell us what to fix, and at the same time give up on thinking we know what they want, what's best for them, viewed from our own perspective. In every business I've worked with, there's always been surprises when we actually went out and talked to customers and gathered feedback systematically in this way. We would never have known from our internal data. Great example of this was from another company providing home broadband. We started measuring the use moment using your Wi-Fi at home, and we found that nearly 40% of customers were dissatisfied, which obviously made us start to sweat. We then obviously started to ask them why. The first reason was the one that we expected. They weren't getting the speeds they were promised. It's the classic thing for Wi-Fi providers. But the second issue, and this was nearly 50% of the total, was they said that the service kept cutting out and they had to keep resetting their router. And we had absolutely no idea this was going on. We had no idea that routers were hanging and they had to turn them off and turn them on again. It's an issue we're all sadly fairly familiar with, but it shows you why it's so important to talk to customers and get the answer from the horse's mouth, because that issue was not showing up anywhere. It wasn't showing up in our call center data. Nobody calls the call center to say my router's hung again, because they know they're just going to be told to turn it off and turn it on again. So people don't bother. But what happens is every single time they have to get up and restart their router, they get that little bit more pissed off. They become a kind of silent sufferer, and their suffering accumulates to the point where when the competition knocks on the door, they go, because they're fed up and desperate for something better. So the key message here is that only by asking customers will we find the truth about what's really bothering them. So we've established the principle of what we want to get from our customers. The next question is how to go about it. What are the mechanics of all of this? There are various ways we can do this. The kind of Rolls-Royce solution that gives you undistorted, high-quality feedback would be an outbound calling solution. So pick on a sample of customers who've just been through a moment in the journey, call them up and ask them the very simple question. Were you happy with your experience? Yes or no? You don't need to have scales of 1 to 10 and so on. You can literally go for the binary yes or no. So you're calling customers and saying, you've just paid your bill, were you happy? If the customer says yes, you can end the call. If the customer says no, then you ask why not. The customer tells you why they were not happy, and then you take their response and code it into the kind of big buckets that capture the typical customer responses. It's as simple as that. Now, obviously, outbound calling has some disadvantages. Clearly, it's a relatively expensive option, although in actual fact, it's not quite as expensive as you might think. I worked with a mobile operator down in Brazil. They had about 3 million customers in their base, and they were doing this outbound calling for every single moment on an ongoing month-on-month basis. And they did it all with a team of 3 people, I think. It's essentially 3 contact center agents redirected from inbound to outbound. And those 3 low-cost resources delivered absolute gold to the organization, being able to tell the organization direct from customers what they were actually saying and telling very specifically what they needed to fix. The other problem with outbound calling is that it can be thought of as a bit intrusive. People generally don't like getting unsolicited calls. It can be a bit irritating. Although again, I have to say in my experience, it can also have quite a positive impact on customers by showing them that you're taking the time to ask them for very direct feedback. This can be particularly true if you take advantage of the call to do some closed-loop problem resolution. Just imagine the impact on a customer of a call to ask about a particular experience, giving some negative feedback, and then the agent replying, "I'm sorry to hear that. Let's see if we can fix that for you right away." You can turn a hater into a fan in an instant. So the other option, more classical online survey. Apart from being cheaper, one of the advantages of this approach is it can be easily integrated into an existing CSAT type survey that many companies have running. Again, the key is to focus on the cohort that have said that they're not happy. The 1s to 6s on a 10-point scale or the 1 to 3s on a 5-point. For those unhappy customers, you replace all of your supplementary questions of grade us on this aspect, grade us on that aspect, with a simple pick list of typical reasons why they might have been unhappy, and just ask them to tick the box of the reason that most drove them to score low. The bill was too high, it keeps changing every month, etc., etc. A quick tip here is to always present the reasons in customer language. I couldn't understand the bill rather than bill clarity and detail. I was overcharged rather than bill accuracy, and so on. In order to do that, you have to be very certain what those reasons actually are. So I would always recommend doing a kind of pilot outbound calling approach right at the beginning, just to make sure you've really captured what customers actually say, so you can play it back to them in the online survey. So, once you've got this very simple customer survey and feedback mechanism in place, you need to go about feeding the insight back into your organization. And again, the trick here is to keep it simple. A nice simple view of the percentage of dissatisfied customers at each moment as the customer goes through the journey with you, underpinned by a single page for each moment that tells you everything you need to know about that moment. The historical view of the percentage of dissatisfied customers so that you start to see it coming down month on month. Secondly, a breakdown of those dissatisfied customers into the key pain points, a nice simple Pareto of the key blocks in the experience. Thirdly, a translation of those customer pain points into internal operating KPIs that reflect the pain points. For example, if customers are complaining that delivery is taking too long, we want to be tracking how often we deliver on time. This way we're translating from an outside-in view from customers as to what makes them unhappy to an inside-out view of our operation that we really can measure and manage. And the final element on our one-pager is what we're actually doing to fix the problem. And this simplified approach strips away all of the paraphernalia that I often encounter with a lot of businesses I work with. There's a kind of industry that's crept up around trying to get more and more and more insight and data points and analysis. And honestly speaking, I think the message here is very definitely one of less is more. The only thing that matters is to identify the big rocks, the 1 or 2 things that customers are screaming at us that we need to fix. Know what's causing most pain to most customers, fix it, and then move on to the next biggest thing. And I think this is something I really need to re-emphasize. The only point of getting feedback and measuring is to know what to fix. It isn't a question of measuring for the sake of tracking, and it definitely isn't a game of precision. I've seen so many organizations getting lost in the woods of data gathering, correlating with complaints and call center data and so on. I've seen a bit of an industry go up around this, and I think in part it's driven by some of the CX platform suppliers, the likes of Medallion, Qualtrics and so on, that need to keep on delivering newer functionalities to justify their existence and their costs. And the result is that most of the effort goes into analysis and interpretation, where in actual fact the answer's screaming out at you, and the effort would be far better used just getting on and fixing the problem. Another thing that contributes to this problem is when the answer you get back from customers is something you don't really want to hear, in a large part because it's not something you really want to face up to or tackle. It's so much easier to have a project to reformat the bill than it is to confront the fact that customers feel they're being overcharged and not getting good value for money. So you end up looking for more and more data to support the conclusion that you think you can do something about. And this brings me on to the next issue that's really important to tackle here, and that is proper root cause analysis. Customers will only tell you what pisses them off, not what caused that in the first place. So to go back to our example, customers say that the bill was higher than expected, but we still don't know whether that's because they were using more data than was in their plan, making international calls, or unwittingly signing up to extra services. So only by doing the analysis and translating customer pain into root causes can we know what action to take and how much of the problem we think we can correct. So once we've got all of this measurement in place and we're producing our nice dashboard with our single page summaries of each of the moments of the journey, doing our root cause analysis of customer pains, we need to put some governance around it. I know this is an obvious statement, but there's some key points in here which I'd really like to cover. The first thing that is absolutely critical to success is a single point of ownership for each of the moments. This is something a lot of businesses struggle with, because what it means is you've got a very simple customer journey model, then you're going to be asking somebody to take full responsibility for a particular customer moment, and that will often mean taking ownership of experiences that are driven by things that go way beyond their operational remit. If we think about the get help moment, just to take a simple and relatable example, often this is owned by the head of customer service. But when you think about a customer getting help, they might indeed call a call center. They might go into a retail store to talk to that nice helpful chap behind the counter, or try to find answers online or in the app, or punt around in social media to see if someone else can answer their question. And it's the customer that chooses where to go and how to find the support. So we need to look at it from their perspective and make sure that we unify and streamline that experience of the get help moment, regardless of the channel that the customer chooses. And the single point of ownership and accountability will mean that in order to fix what needs to be fixed, the owner will have to cross organizational boundaries, working with digital, with retail, with marcoms and so on, to deliver a seamless integrated experience. So having moment owners gives straightforward accountability with a very straightforward KPI. What percentage of their customers are not happy with their performance in their moment? And it's designed to feel uncomfortable. As an owner, knowing that 40% of my customers in my moment are not happy with the experience I'm giving them should make me sweat. And this is the way of instilling into the organization a sense of urgency, accountability, and pain. And then on the back of this direct accountability model, you need to put in place a simple monthly review cycle. And where I've seen this working the best is where you keep this at the highest level possible in the organization. The ideal scenario is the CEO himself conducts the review of the actual experience, going moment by moment, grilling his moment owners on their performance. Why aren't the levels of percent of dissatisfied customers going down month on month? What are you doing about it? Are the action plans sufficient? All the usual aspects of managing a key dimension of the business. The critical thing is it's not something that gets buried down into the organization with people beavering away at the lower levels who don't really have the clout and support to really get things done. Very specifically, what you really want to avoid is to have a centralized CX department desperately trying to push the business to get changes implemented. Having senior people from the business, acting as moment owners, reporting to the CEO or the management committee level is vital. It not only makes sure that real action is taken, but almost more importantly, it starts to send and embed a message across the whole company that what customers think really matters and we take it seriously. I'm hoping to be able to talk to one of the CEOs I worked with later on in this podcast series to go into his perspective in a bit more detail. But I know that this framework really put the power into his hands. He knew exactly what customers were feeling, what their key issues were, what was being done about it. He went from having this diffuse set of departmental KPIs to a simple dashboard that told him exactly where he needed to put pressure, where to prioritize, and it really put a steering wheel in his hand to be able to drive his business. So what all this leads to is that over time, not only does the level of dissatisfaction start to go down month after month after month, but also, almost without being aware of it, the organization starts to get used to hearing what customers really think and acting on it, which is the absolute foundation, the ground zero level of customer centricity. It starts to create a belief in the importance of listening to customers, and it turns that mystical thing called CX into just another dimension of the business that's measured and managed just the same as revenues, churn rates, operating costs, and so on. So we'll leave it there for this episode. We've got a business that's on its way to customer centricity, that's embedded the practice of listening to what really gets in the way of building a positive relationship with customers. And in the next episode, we'll talk about how to move on to the next step. Not just removing the negative, but starting to create the positive, starting to build a unique and differentiated branded experience. Thank you for listening and hope to see you soon.